No matter your business size, complexity, or stage of your digital transformation journey, Promapp has the flexibility to grow with you. Traditionally, a technical team or trained improvement specialist used specific methodology when they wanted to document a current state process for improvement or craft a process script for automation. Because of Promapp's ease of creating a process, business teams and frontline workers can easily write and manage processes using Promapp's business-orientated methodology, making process management effort a business as usual activity across the entire company. Doing so will only promote longevity to your business process management projects. Here we're starting in Nintex Promapp's homepage, where as a user I can easily search for processes and documents by title or keyword search. Obviously create a process, see my recently viewed and my favourite processes. I can also track any activities that I may need to action in real life time. Underneath the dashboard here, I can see a governance structure view how my business is tracking. I've got my clearly defined governance team, the total processes tracking within the organisation, and any feedback and suggestions that have come in from those users within my organisation and responses that may be required. Underneath, I can see at a process group level, commonly defined by division, department, or services, how our business is tracking, what published processes we have in place, what's in development, and how we're actually tracking is in a view format here as well. Let's take a look at that group structure view. Here you'll see this is where I can define my different divisions or departments, services, and I can clearly define our process group champions. Today we're going to take a look at the sales and marketing side of things, where we've started to create our processes between customer services and account managers. We've got setting up a credit approval for a prospect and creating a sales order. This can be edited to show different ways of how our work is actually flowing between different roles and responsibilities within the organisation. Jumping in here to setting up a credit approval for a prospect, we can see between customer services, account manager and finance that there is a way of working between different activities. So firstly, we're setting up a prospect customer. And as I drill in, I can actually see ABC task level instructing me on how to actually complete this part of the process. I'm then sending requests for information to the customer, receiving and processing the credit check form. Finance are then reviewing the application and making a decision on whether the customer passes or not. If we take a step back here, we can also see as part of setting up a process that we define a process expert, generally a subject matter expert, and a process owner, someone who will manage this process. We're defining the process objective on how and why we actually have this process running, and a review date to really support us on continuously keeping these up to date, compliant, and improved. We also track all changes made on this process, and we have full version control. As you can see here, this is version 6.0, a published process for those who have access to it. This is what they'll see. We also track documents and cycle costs and systems. As you'll see, I can easily hover over the systems that are being used as part of this process. Now, from an IT perspective, I do want you to note that as part of our systems tab up here, we can run a systems map, actually tracking something like Salesforce, where it's being used right across every process group within the organization, right down to process level, activity, and task, which can really help you when you're looking to replace a solution or design a new workflow within Salesforce, as an example, to ensure that you're impacting the right people at the right time. Now, how do we get here as part of creating a process? Let's jump into the edit mode here. You'll see instead of the traditional drag and drop boxes to actually create a process through process diagrams, what we're doing is simply adding activities as and when required. Simply describing the activity, assigning a role, adding tasks, notes which may be different circumstances, and attaching those different forms, guides, web links on the go. Now, of course, to make it even easier, we can drag and drop different activities to ensure that we keep our processes up to date as and when our business processes them. But let's take a look at some of the other features here. You'll see that we can define our triggers and inputs. In this case, we've got the customer calling in daily. We're receiving about 50,000 of these a day. We can also add inputs. Maybe these are other processes that actually impact this particular process. Our outputs and targets. So whether we're closing these accounts or creating a sales order, what are those next steps, those layers that we have as part of these processes that we're actually working through? And for those of you who are tracking performance targets, these can also be measured as part of our performance targets here as well. But putting on a BA hat here, this is where we can really start to look at continuous improvement. By setting up timeframes against each activity here, what we're able to do is track our active and wait time. In this case, it takes on average about 2 days for a customer to bring us back the information we require to move them through and actually process a credit check form. Now, if we look at this process on a total time to process and how many times we process it per year, it gives us a really good gauge on whether we're going to add value by actually automating this particular process. Now, the way this works, and if we jump into our procedure view, which is right here next to our map view, you'll see we can see a text-based view of that procedure as it works through. But here's a really nice place to see how this calculation starts to come together. Between using the active time it takes within this particular process, then an average salary that we've put against each role within Promapp, it calculates an average cost per hour and then a cost for this particular activity, giving us that cycle cost across this particular process, then calculating out that total annual cost per year. If I have a look at this, it gives me a really good red flag that this process is due for some improvement. So what we're going to do here is look at how feedback can come in. In this case, I've already submitted some feedback that's come in here from Thomas Smith. Now, Thomas could have done this as a user of Promapp, or he could have done it if we had embedded what we call a mini mode link into a SharePoint site. Perhaps Thomas isn't in a role that's day in, day out in process, but he wants to support our continuous improvement team and our process culture by submitting some feedback that he's picked up as part of this process. In this case, there is an additional step in this process. They're receiving an email in a central inbox that is allocated out to a customer services rep before we review this application. That's really great information to see. And as this process has been out and published over 6 times, we definitely want to get this up to date. So again, let's jump into edit mode and actually work through this. We're going to add an activity where we have a review of central CS inbox. Okay, we're going to give this to the customer services team and we're going to simply add a task. We're going to each day review Okay, so we've got some manual reviews coming in and we're allocating out to staff depending on who is available at what time. Now you'll see again, I'm just simply dragging this up. It's part of that starting point, that 1.0. It happens before we set up this prospect customer. So let's save that and see how it's changed the map. Coming into this map view, you'll see that we now have this 1.0. It doesn't have a time allocation on it. We can add that in as and when we need to. But we can simply see it's now the first step of our process, and we've got those tasks nicely defined. What we may want to do is submit this into our improvements team to actually take a look at this particular process and how we may be able to automate it to really add value to this team that are working through what is quite a manual process today. So what we're going to do is take this particular feedback and actually raise what we call an improvement project ticket. Now you'll see here that this is part of our improvement and incident module. So it's pulling through that full description from our customer services person. We're going to bring in our automation quality team, and maybe we might even bring in our improvement specialist as well. Now, as I'm the process owner of this particular process, I want to be kept informed by email as I need to work alongside our improvement team to ensure we get this process right before we publish it out to our users and retrain. So let's report that in. This takes us through to our improvement area, where I now have an overview of our improvement projects. I can then move this through to investigation and define the recommended actions and actually a bit of a project around what we're going to do with this improvement project idea. So let's put on our BA hat and move back through our recently views and into our credit approval process. Now, of course, because we've got that full version control going on, our end users and the customer services team can still view our published 6.0 version, but I'm working through this edit to ensure we get this right as we define what is our current state process and we start to redefine that into a future state process. The easiest way for me to do this is to use what we call is our process variant management. Here I'm going to use a global variation and I'm going to apply our continuous improvement variation. This is going to give me the ability to see our current state process and our future state process as well, and actually do some comparisons across them. As you'll see, I now have a current state, today's processes, and a future state. So I can move through into this to be area and start to redesign this particular process. If we jump into our edit mode here, we can redesign this particular part of the process. So instead of reviewing a central customer services inbox, I'm actually going to remove this entire part of the process. And what we're going to do is actually redesign this as a web form. So the customer enters all relevant information into an NWC form. Now, for those of you that don't know, we have a great integration between Promapp and Nintex Workflow Cloud, allowing you the ability to design forms, publish them to websites or other areas as required, and then trigger off an automated workflow. So in this case, we're only going to need to evaluate a customer's need as that information comes in off that form. This particular Word document is no longer required because we're going to have our nice web form available. We're also going to use the workflow tool to work with our connectors in Salesforce to actually create this new customer file. And then we're going to use the tools within Salesforce to notify our account manager. So we've really reduced the effort in manual processing already in just 2 activities. I think you'll get the idea from here. Let's save this and see what that comparison starts to look like. If we come here into our procedure view, you'll see here that it's nicely doing a comparison of our current state and future state, removing those steps that are no longer relevant and bringing in those new ones. We can then work through our cost and time effort so that those budget holders can have a real live idea on how our new future state process is going to compare as we process over 50,000 applications per year.
For more information on Nintex Promapp, please visit www.nintex.com/Promapp.